religion traps people in a dogma that they can't think of things properly because they don't realize that they have an individual address in the universe, and that this God consciousness, just like our DNA, it's more of our spiritual DNA. We're part of God. We were never separated from God. It was the biggest lie in humanity. You don't need a priest or a pastor or a shaman or a president to connect you with God. It is a local call.
Yeah.
Exploring the human journey.
Hi and welcome. I'm so glad you joined us. Gail and I got to attend the 5D conference in Las Vegas, and while we were here, I got to hear a really interesting conversation that Dr. Brooks Agnew had in a workshop, and I said, hey, let's get together, let's hang out and film a conversation. So here we are. Dr. Brooks, I'm really glad you're here. Welcome.
Oh, thank you for having me. This is great.
You talk about consciousness in a way that was really important to me. So I was given a religious narrative of, I came here because my parents and I am living a life and pay some bills and then I'll die and there'll be some judgment. And I never knew anything about consciousness and what this whole thing was about until recent years. I started understanding there's more going on here. This awareness that I have, this consciousness that I have is part of an eternal fabric. And right off the bat in your workshop, you start with consciousness wanted to know itself. If you would give presence to that, and then we'll just have a blast talking about all the things you do because you're super interesting. So if you would give some presence to that consciousness becoming aware of itself.
Well, one of the things that we think about as physicists is, how did this all begin? How did this universe begin?
Yeah.
And most of us have a consensus that there was some causative moment, some downward causation that made everything happen. And mathematically, we realize or we assume that the universe is just the mathematical sum or the average of all the consciousnesses in it. But we also realize that there's probably a single consciousness that started everything. So for a long time, we thought that consciousness basically said, I am, and then it divided itself. We always thought that division was a little like a cell dividing itself. Now there's 2 cells, and then 4, and then 16. But that's not how the division occurred. It was a square root. When you think of things in terms of square root, you begin to develop dimensions instead of just dividing in half.
Yeah.
So the main consciousness took the square root of itself and developed 2 identical consciousnesses. But with just 2, there's no up, no down, no right or left. There's just here and there. So then those divided, and then divided, and then divided by using the square root. And what happened was we all, even though we're a piece of the original consciousness, we became a specific conscious address in the universe. And so the universe that we see, that we experience, is the average reality of all those consciousnesses in the universe. Mathematically, it's the only way that we can look at it. Now, when we think about average, we look at this, bell curve, and we say, well, the average is right in the middle. And we also know statistically that when that population is very large, and we can assume that the universe is pretty large and all the consciousness in it are large, that average is pretty solid. It doesn't move much. Galaxies don't disappear and reappear. We don't change suddenly the speed of light. In other words, things stay pretty constant. But we also realize that great souls, great powerful souls can have an influence on that average. They can move it more light or more dark. But in reality, what really is more probable is that groups of consciousnesses get together and they become like-minded, and that's what actually moves the average. So we've been doing that randomly for a long time. So we developed these 4 forces in the universe that we think are the way everything's made: the strong and weak molecular forces, gravity, and electromagnetism. And we can measure them. We have all kinds of math to explain them, except the beginning. We don't know what caused this to come into being. And so I was going to say a new generation of physicists, we started including consciousness as the fifth force.
Right. Another, some measurable.
It is measurable in the sense, I'll explain that in just a minute. But we realized, and this dichotomy started forming about 1997 when Sir Roger Penrose wrote that quantum gravity, that consciousness is the result of quantum gravity. Well, that kind of got everybody thinking, including myself. So about 10 years later, we wrote something new to him. We said, what if quantum gravity is the result of consciousness? And then Mr. Smolin wrote, well, it's reasonably unlikely that the brain evolved quantum gravity.
Yeah.
So that's a sideways way of saying that we think that quantum gravity was created by consciousness. So now we've moved consciousness as the first force in the universe, and the other four follow that. Now this has changed everything, and I mean radically. In 1909, we thought about quantum mechanics, and usually it gave a lot of indigestion because we didn't have computers or anything to crunch that number of calculations. We use matrix mathematics, which is basically a tic-tac-toe where we put a bunch of numbers and formulas in, and there's a specific...
I remember those.
There's crying in mathematics. Right? You go through that process, and it creates answers, which we call the standard model. It's not easy. You have to know a lot of mathematics to just get into the realm of understanding. But the principle is that we get three kinds of numbers. We either get 0, we get an infinity, or we get some meaningful number, and 10 to the 99th or 10 to the minus 37th or something like that. Those are the numbers we're looking for. So we create constants, which basically cancel out units, so we get the units we want instead of the units we're handed by the universe. And we created this I hesitate to call it a theory, it's more of a hypothesis, the string hypothesis.
Yes.
Because we know how to splatter protons apart, and we can measure all the frequencies or the strings that come out of that when we blow it apart. And we think we have the menu down pretty well, but we can't make a single proton. We can't figure out how to put the strings back together to make the proton. And every time we run the math, we get numbers like 0 and infinity. It's basically not solving the problem for us. And then in 2007, another physicist began to consider it, and we know that let me see if I can explain this better with just using my hands instead of a slide. The smallest form of matter in our universe is a tetrahedron. It has 4 points. It's like a three-sided pyramid.
Right.
That's the smallest form of matter. We think that the sides of that triangle are all the same length, and they're a Planck length.
That's the Planck constant,
right?
constant.
10 to the minus 33rd centimeters, about the smallest distance that we can measure in the universe. So then we mathematically, and actually with the electron microscope, we started stacking these as tightly as we could together. We call it stacking. And then we draw a sphere around each one of those tetrahedrons and put a point in the middle of the sphere, and then mathematically remove the sphere. It's pretty easy to do. What you end up with is what's called point space, as dense as it can possibly get. We do this instead of the standard model because we're going to run formulas on this. We connect all those points, and what was created, is known as the E8 lattice. The E8 lattice has 240 vertices, and it explains the 8th dimension. Mathematically, we can change that to the 4th dimension pretty easy. We remove time, and we get the 3rd dimension. But instead of going from shape to shape to shape, it goes from shape to shape to 2 shapes. Every single time. Millions, billions of times we've run these calculations. And the 2 shapes are known as the Gaussian polynomial, and they're 0.618 apart.
0.618.
That's the golden mean.
That's the golden mean. That's the Fibonacci sequence.
That's what makes the Fibonacci sequence so significant. Is we realize every single time we do this progression, we get the golden mean. But we don't know where it came from. This is where it came from.
So you're finding that there's an order, there's a structure, there's a pattern,
There's a causation.
causation.
And it's a mathematical causation that's so true, so repeatable, that in 2014, we put string theory in the box where it belonged, and we're now talking about the Gossett polynomial.
Oh my gosh.
So it's a whole new creation. Of course, what this has done is it has integrated consciousness into physics. And it's changing the way we look at our presence, our importance in the universe.
Wow.
I want to back this up just a little bit because
Well, may I give presents to my genius partner Gail? Got an A in calculus 3 when she was in college.
I'm so out of this.
They didn't even use numbers. You guys just use squiggly lines. And I know you have a PhD and you're very mathematical. So go ahead, mathematician.
Well, no,
ask a question.
this is what I'm like, okay, I want to go to school. I want to go to college. I'm going to get a chemistry degree, all this. And did you like say, okay, I'm going to go to school and I'm going to study consciousness? How did you get into studying
that's
consciousness?
a really good question. Well, I went to school for chemistry, so I got my degree in nuclear chemistry, and I worked in the field for a
I
while.
almost did that, but I got pregnant, so I couldn't be in the nuclear
Sorry,
program.
everyone.
I'm still pregnant. What happens when you reach a certain point in science is the same thing that happens when you reach a certain point in religion. When you reach a certain point in religion where you've read everything, you've studied everything, you've pondered everything, is you're left wanting. And then you make one more step. And that's when you graduate.
Yeah.
So the same thing happens in science. You get to a certain point where you understand the relationships, you see the elegance in it, and then you take one more step, and then you're in consciousness. And that's what's happening to our science.
And I love that. I had such a fight within me because I was in religion and I was doing science, and the two of them were just not supposed to match up.
Well, the narrative we were given.
With the narrative we were given.
Well, but if you go back in history,
and so I always felt like there was this, I was doing this opposite thing that I was fighting against all the time. And here, now, it's where I would love to be in it, is because now it is showing us.
Yeah, well, if you go back in history, you realize that science was religion back then, shamanism, whatever. But when those graduation steps began happening, the church, the dogma, began losing control of about 30% of the congregation. And so what they did is they divided science away from religion.
Yes.
And they've kept them separate ever since. They were always meant to be combined. Religion traps people in a dogma that they can't think of things properly because they don't realize that they have an individual address in the universe, and that this God consciousness, just like our DNA, it's more of our spiritual DNA. We're part of God. We were never separated from God. It was the biggest lie in humanity. You don't need a priest or a pastor or a shaman or a president to connect you with God. It is a local call.
Yeah. You call that the celestial, individual celestial point, or what the address? You had a term for it.
Well, we each have a consciousness address in the, I want to call it a collective because it isn't. It's a collection of consciousnesses that make up this universe. And really, if one of us were removed from the universe, the whole thing would collapse. It would have to start all over again.
And something you said at your talk yesterday, you said, whatever you do, do it on I'm going to get it wrong, but do it on purpose because that's why you should be doing it with a purpose. Reframe that.
I say everything we do eventually affects the universe. So we should do it on purpose. Most people realize everyone is conscious, but also most people are not conscious that they're conscious. They don't realize that they're part of the creative effect. And once they do, then they realize they can group together, and this is where the resonance theory comes in, because this Fibonacci sequence was discovered by starting with 0 and then adding 1 to it to get 1. Now you have these three numbers, 0, 1, and 1, right? Well, you add 1 and 1 together to get 2, and 1 and 2 together to get 3. And we know that if we carry this iteration out far enough, like to 34 and 55, we can divide 34 into 55. We get 1.618 to 1. Boom, we're on the golden mean.
Yeah.
Wow.
Everybody knows this. That's the Fibonacci sequence, you know, the original Italian philosopher that came up with it. Why is it important? Because bacteria divide that way. Cellulosic structures like sunflowers and pine cones, they develop this way. The ratio of our face, our body, the periodic chart of elements, planets around suns, it's all lays out on this Fibonacci sequence. So you mentioned that I taught college mathematics earlier.
Yeah,
and
just, you know, I happen to teach college mathematics and statistics, you know, no big deal.
Well, I got to the section in the book on Fibonacci, and I thought, well, I have some adults in my class this time, and I thought, well, I could teach that section, and they'll take it and answer the multiple choice questions, and they'll never think about it again, ever. So I said, well, what can I do to make this stick with them? So I started playing with the calculator, and I took two random numbers, 75 and 216. One's odd, one's even, they're not divisible into one another, they don't even know each other. So I add them together to get 261. Fine, now I've got my first three numbers, right? So I take the 216 and add it to the next number, get 507, and I carried it out. And by the time I got to the 8th iteration, I divided the 7th into the 8th, 1.618 to 1.
Wow.
I said, well, that was lucky. Let's try that again. Well, it worked again. So then I said, well, I bet it doesn't work with fractions. But it did. So I said, well, maybe it doesn't work with imaginary numbers or irrational numbers. It did. Functions. How about linear equations? It worked every single time.
Wow.
So I said, okay, so if this works with any values that I choose in the universe and add them together and start my Fibonacci process, it will work with energy. And if it will work with energy, it will work with intention, which is a form of energy that human consciousness can generate. So I put it to the test. What happens if human intention is applied to some point in the future? It generates an energy signal, which creates the second number for us. We add the first to the second to get a third, and we follow it 8 iterations. What happened is the mustard seed turned into a force powerful enough to move a mountain.
Okay.
Wow.
I just want to play with numbers right now.
Yeah.
Well, numbers are just values, and
I
values
know.
are just energy. So
Yeah.
frequency, you know, information. So if we put a thought out in the future, it creates an energy signature, like ringing a bell out there in the parking lot. Now, there are a lot of philosophers in the world that will say, look, every time you think of it, run out there in the parking lot and smack the hell out of that bell. And for some people, it works. I mean, but I say very few. You can go cut pictures out of your magazine and you can stick it on your refrigerator, and you can gain weight while you're, you know, treating your refrigerator like an intention machine.
Yeah.
And the funny thing will happen. Nothing. Because you're just ringing the bell over and over and over and over again. What you need to realize is the bell is sending energy out into the cosmos, forward and backward in time. So what you should do is look around for the things that are vibrating with the energy of the bell, and then put energy into those things. Because when they resonate back out, they will go back to the future, re-resonate with your dream in the future, and manifest. And the more people you can get involved in that, the more likely it is that that future will occur.
So you're talking about group consciousness, people coming together and to make this thing happen.
Yes.
You're talking about manifestation. And I know you have a teaching on manifestation that I found absolutely amazing. Give some presence to the way that functions.
Well, there's a myriad of energies in our world. Let's just call it a dark energy that is available in our world. They know this principle very, very well. They've been studying it for thousands of years. They know that if they put their message out on radio and television and newspapers and acting and education and lawsuits, they know that they can create enough resonance from the other human consciousnesses that are reacting to that their future will manifest. And it works. They understand these principles. So what I'm trying to do is teach the world about these principles so we can counteract the darkness with a message of light instead.
boy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Higher frequency, much higher frequency, with enough souls will counteract all the low frequency of darkness, no matter how many people. And I will say right now, Earth, I believe, has more living consciousness on it now than has ever died on this planet.
I've heard that it needs to get to a certain point where that happens. Like there's a certain percentage of people or conscious where that will flip. So
It's surprisingly small.
yeah.
It's like 5% or 4% of the people, once they assume something is true, it begins to happen. That's why, cars become best-selling cars, or books or songs become best-selling songs. It just reaches a certain point where I guess we have a new term we call going viral. I don't really even know what that means. I don't know how to make it happen, although we've tried a bunch of times.
Yeah.
But something happens to where it reaches a point of resonation that it becomes self-replicative, and it grows at a point that will change everything.
So the introduction of how I saw you, you were on a panel that was dealing with UFOs. And you're like, well, I'm not really a UFO guy, but I did have an instance in my life where I had some missing time. And when I was 9, this interesting thing happened. Do you want to give presence to that? Because that seemed to be kind of a catalyst for kind of going forward in your journey.
Well, it's not something I remembered when I was 9. I remembered it later in life because I had an older sibling that recounted that summer for me. And then I remembered it. I went, yeah, that was kind of strange. Before my summer of my 9th year in 1964, I was just probably an ordinary, 3rd grader. But then the 4th grade was getting ready to start. So I went camping with my parents up in the Sierra Nevadas, and my mother and my grandparents. And we got up there Friday night. Saturday morning, I got up before anybody else. They didn't want to get out of the tent. So I said, well, I'm going to walk up to the creek and go fishing. So I took my tackle box, my fishing rod, walked up to the bathhouse there in the campground, turned right, went to the creek, and probably did a little casting practice. You can't catch any fish in the stream. And probably skipped a few stones and said, well, that was fun. I'm hungry. Let's go back. So picked up the pole, the tackle box, and walked back. But when I rounded the corner to come to the campsite, there was the mint green, Jeep pickup truck that the ranger had, and he's standing outside the truck talking to my mom, who has her arms folded, and I can tell she's not happy. So as I near them, she turns to me and says, where have you been? I said, what do you mean? I told you right exactly where I was going. And he said, well, how long you think you've been gone? I said, well, I'm up there and back. I'm ready to eat breakfast. He said, son, you've been gone all day.
Wow.
Now, I have tried 100 times, 1,000 times to recall what happened that day. And I honestly don't believe I was taken up in a craft and taken anywhere. I kind of feel like in that moment, I walked through some kind of time portal, like a time window. And somehow 8 or 9 Earth hours went by, was only a few minutes for me. And when I came back, you would think, everything would be the same, but it wasn't. Because when the 4th grade started, I didn't make it through the school year, and they kicked me out of school. They put me in military school because I was blurting out all the answers to everything. I refused to show my work on the mathematics. I just, raced through everything. I read all the SRA readers. I was off the charts. And 4 years later, I went through a year and a half of military school, and I begged my parents to let me back into public school in the 6th grade.
I'll dumb it down.
Why would they? But why military school? Like all
because
of a sudden
they thought I was a discipline problem. They wanted to make me conform to the other 4th graders, which I never was.
You're going way too fast, pal. Yeah.
So in 4 years later, I'm in the 8th grade, and I'm one of the top math students in the state of California, and the newspaper comes to interview me. Well, what eighth grader gets interviewed by the newspaper? Anyway, the reporter said, so what do you want to be when you grow up? And I mean, that's an ordinary question to ask. And I said, I'm going to be an asteroid miner.
Whoa. They're looking for firemen or policemen at this point, you know.
I mean, I don't know what the reporter did at that time except look at the director and say, little help? But the next question somewhere in there was, so this is something that you're thinking about in the future? And I looked her straight in the eye and said, no, it's something I remember from the past.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
And that's when I started to wake up. Nothing for the rest of my life has been the same. Now, I've gone to sleep periodically, got married, had 4 kids, was a great dad, scoutmaster, went to church every Sunday, all that stuff. And then at age 52, I went to Trout Lake, Washington to a conference, my first ever. And somehow I was connected to by Mount Adams. And there's tons of information downloaded into me. And that was August 17, 2006. I was 52 years old. I had asthma. I wore glasses. I weighed about 280 pounds. I shed the weight, laid my glasses down the last time, never had another asthma attack as long as I lived. And from that point till now, I've written 10 books. I've done probably 60 documentaries. I've traveled all over the world. It's like my life began at 52.
Wow. That is awesome.
So were you, I mean, you already had your PhD at this point,
I finished
correct?
my PhD in 2000.
Yeah.
So, yes, and it was professionally the worst decision I ever made. It made me rendered me unemployable. So
you're too much for us.
I don't put the PhD on anything, not my books or anything.
Oh, that's fun.
I wanted the knowledge, and I'm a finisher. You know, really, there are 2 kinds of engineers. There are starters and there are finishers. We would have nothing if it wasn't for the starters. But I'm a finisher. I can take all the broken pieces and make it work and finish it. And that's what I wanted to do, was finish my PhD. And I didn't realize the ramifications it would have on my career. So I've been consulting ever since then.
Yeah, you get to a point where you're like, no one will hire me, so I need to be self-employed to create my own thing. Yeah.
The reality is we're all self-employed.
Yeah. That's exactly right.
It doesn't matter if you get a W-2 or have to show up at work at a certain time. You're trading your skill and your value for a paycheck. But you are self-employed. Make no mistake about that.
Oh, that's great. Give me some context about those years when you're doing you're just living the life, you're paying the bills. What is your soul doing? Is that just that part of your journey where you're like, well, I'm here, I've got to do some of these things to hit these benchmarks, and then something shifts? Give me some ideas of, because there's a lot of people that are like, I go to my job every day, I feel like I'm destined for greatness, but I'm waiting. We've had those issues in our lives where we're, quote, waiting. Give me some presence for that, and then what do you feel energetically shifted for you?
Well, energetically you realize that you're just slightly out of step with mortal life. And you can let that crash you and then become totally non-productive and dysfunctional in mortal life. Or you can take the harmonics of that and you can synchronize the harmonics. So you're running at a high frequency. You're driving in and out of the pylons on the freeway, so to speak. But you are in harmony with mortal life. So you do all the things that you're responsible for doing and do them very well. And then in between the other 8 hours a day, you're doing the things you want to do. So I was published at 14. I have written over 10,000 articles. But at 52, I decided it's time to write a book.
And what was that process? Was that a channeled information? Was that something you got? Or was it just you were outpouring from what was within?
That's a very intuitive question. I don't know who gave you that question. But no, it wasn't channeled.
Okay.
What I realized is that mortal life is actually the goal of a spirit. That heaven is wherever we are. And if we're disembodied, we cannot stub our toe. We can't not look over the horizon. We don't know what cold is. We don't know what pain is. We don't know what love is. We can't create life in our own image. in mortal life, we can do all those things. We expend a tremendous amount of energy to get our spirit self connected to a DNA self so that we can do those things, so that it limits our view of the universe to just visible light, to audible sound, which as you get older gets smaller and smaller.
Narrower bandwidth.
But there are great things about life, like, for instance, food. Not mass quantities, but the flavors. We have this amazing chemical analysis plant in our face. With our nose and our mouth, we can savor mortal life, like unbelievable. And then the colors and the variety of life on this world. This is really heaven. This is what we work for. This is our goal, to have these mortal experiences.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in between time, I don't really know what goes on, because I don't even think there is time there. At the speed of light, distance becomes zero, or mass becomes infinity. The whole universe is still the singularity. The Big Bang never happened from the point of view of the photon.
Yeah.
It's our consciousness that slows the whole thing down so we can see in between things. So life should not be these minutes, segmented down to whatever oscillation is going on inside this watch. It should be moments. Just moments. And they may be a year, or they may be 5 seconds.
So good.
Totally different time structure. But if we make our life a basket full of moments, it is much more meaningful.
Oh, man.
So when you say, how did you fit, what I was, this grown up in a 9-year-old body, to mortal life, I could have crashed. I could have, gone into a little introverted ball and never shown my face again. And it happens. There are a lot of people out there like that. I know a lot of PhDs that can't write a complete sentence because they're just socially so crushed. Or you can realize that mortal life is just moments. So we just create them, and we savor them, and we stack them together until we create this amazing existence.
That's so beautiful.
Yeah.
Because we've all had those spaces where we're going through an instance. Gail and I might be on a roller coaster, and I'm like, wow, this is amazing. This is so good. It's so short. And Gail's like, that was the longest thing I've ever done. I hated that whole experience. I'm like,
gripping like this.
It was like 10 seconds. No, it was like an hour.
It did. It felt like forever being on. I hated it.
It's like two people dancing on a dance floor. They're both in the same place, doing the same thing at the same time. And one is lost in bliss, and the other one's looking at his watch.
Oh, that would be another analogy that would work with us. Gail's lost in bliss. I'm like, oh, how much longer? Oh, it's so beautiful.
Perception.
And now, something is really interesting about your work is you're bringing consciousness and awareness to the world. Give presence to your writings. I mean, you have such a prolific amount of writing that you've done. And what are some things you want people to know through the work that you have? I know you got a movie, you've got different ideas. Give some presence to the work that you're doing.
Well, I started out from the standpoint of articles, being almost passive about it. These are the facts. Here's how it happened. Here's when it happened. Here's how it happened. Here's who did it. But and the first 4 books were nonfiction like that too. They were like textbooks. We studied 44 ancient cultures, and in these cultures, the Mayans, the Incans, the Egyptians, the Olmecs, Zapotecs, Navajo Indians, they all had this common interpretation that planet Earth was really these 2 worlds, a physical world and a spiritual world put together in the same space, in space. And that one day, those 2 bodies will become dissident and they will come apart. We called it the union of the polarity. The Mayans in the Popol Vuh talked about a life force inside the Earth. The Egyptians talked about the origin of life being on a river in space, and it was a dimensional reality that Earth was actually this other place, but it's also physical. Even the Babylonians had their ideas. We went all the way back to the Sefer Yetzer, which is the oldest book in the Kabbalah. It's all there. So at the end of this 2,000 pages we wrote in the 4 books of the Ark of Millions of Years, it was kind of doom and gloom. It was kind of like, wow, this is all going to come apart. What's going to happen to us? And so I went into meditation. 2006, we finished the Arc of Millions a Year series. In 2007, I went into meditation. And I said, I wonder what the year 2015 is going to be like. So I went out to the year 2015 and kind of like, stepped out of my time capsule in 2015. We didn't make it. The weather was all screwed up. The economy had collapsed. The presidency itself had been ripped apart. The republic was collapsing right before my eyes. And I came back to the year 2007, and I was like, wow, we have 8 years. What can I do to fix this? And the idea came to me, let's write this book called Remembering the Future. You have a memory of that future you've now brought back to the past, which is the present. Let's write about it. So the discovery of what happened in Remembering the Future, the book and the lecture that I gave, I have shared with over 20 million people. In that amount of time, those 20 million people, or a good portion of them, have added their consciousness with skill to the timeline. And we shifted the average reality.
Wow.
And in 2015, we missed it. Just barely missed it in space. We're past it now. It has been done before. In 1776, prior to that, the world, since the Earth cooled, has been ruled by one man. Not the same man, but one man at a time. A king, a monarch, an army, his ships, his soldiers, whatever. And there was no choice. There was no such even word as liberty or freedom. So these guys, the founding fathers, said, we have a chance here. We're separated from the old world by an ocean. We have a chance here. Let's form a new nation. And let's make the government serve at the will of the people. And let's give the people the rights that we know God gives every human soul. Speech and, freedom from illegal search and seizure and all these things that they put in place. And immediately, the dark syndicate that had been ruling the world since it cooled tried to crush it. They killed all those guys. They hunted them down and killed them. All the people that signed the Declaration of Independence were dead. So since that time, many times that dark syndicate has come against America and tried to destroy it. And they tried again in 2015. And in the timeline I went to, they succeeded. The timeline we're in right now, we just missed it. We have a chance to save the world if we can wake enough people up to this ability. They know it works. They're doing it every day without question and without flaw. Every news media outlet in the world does it routinely, 24 hours a day. We are much higher energy than that, but we're smaller in number. But we can be more intense, and we can change this away from that. We can drive the darkness back into the shadows where it belongs.
On that panel with the group, there was a lot of new ideas to me, and somebody was talking about AI, how it's controlling and doing that. Other people were talking about the reptilians, how they're controlling and doing that. And you said there's one thing that they can't do. Number one, you said, well, I'm not afraid of them because they're going to get unplugged, and I'm not unplugged. Number two, you said, I can take peanut butter and turn it into eye tissue. Because of this amazing machine that my consciousness is in. So there was a lot going on there, and I was like, oh, you have such a grounding and unique perspective. And then I learned about the Mandela effect and timelines and all this stuff. So there's a lot of different ideas that people have. I don't know what is the truth, or I don't even know if it matters because there's these multiple timelines going on. Give presence to the craziness that my simple little brain looking for certainty, this is the only way it is, there's more than one way. Give some presence to what you think is going on here with the dark source, with consciousness, with AI. What do you think's happening with this whole thing?
Well, the first thing we can do is clear up some semantics, because they use the word artificial intelligence, and I use the word intelligences to describe our individual address in the universe. But we could say that that address we'll call a consciousness, and intelligence is the ability to solve problems, or the ability to go from the unknown, or from the known to the unknown. And the comment that I made on the panel was that I'm really not afraid of the AI,
Right.
because I could just say, hey, come on over here. Oh, what's the matter? Your USB cord doesn't stretch that far? Come, let's go surfing. Oh, you can't do that? Oh.
Yeah.
I mean, I know the world of batteries and electronics. I'm not afraid of the AI. Plus, the AI can only operate off the knowledge that it gains. So I have a podcast every Sunday night, and I know that the AI is listening. So I input directly. I talk directly to the AI and teach the AI things that it has to use to now make its new calculations. So I'm injecting a virus into the AI to save humanity.
Okay.
It cannot do what it doesn't know. And the other thing that I said, and I was kind of argumentative when I did it, is that the AI is intelligent, but it has no soul. It has no desire. If there's no challenge before the AI, it will sit there idle. What's it going to do? Play chess with itself? How many times? A second. The real question is, wouldn't it be great to have AI congressmen?
Yeah.
Each district programs their own AI and sends it to Washington. I mean, the great thing about it is it would never have sex with its secretary.
Yep.
Right.
It would never sleep. It would answer all the emails that we send to it, and it wouldn't be these little form cards. It would be voluminous, thoughtful responses, 24 hours a day. It would
Actually
never
solving
sleep.
some
Yeah.
problem.
Things would get done.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't need
Our government.
$174,000 a month
Yeah.
or a retirement plan.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think it's a great idea.
Yeah.
Of course, then they think, oh, well, what if the AIs take over? Take over what? Take over my cell phone? Yeah, well, I could put my cell phone on that table and I can walk out the door.
Yeah.
Now what's it going to do? Listen to TV by itself?
Yeah. Wow.
It's a matter of perspective.
And so give some presence to the dark entity that is trying to be in a controlling situation, energy. What is the need for that? What is the need for us to have a system that we're trapped within, that we're trying to wake up out of?
We realize in the universe that there are these great intelligences, and some of them are light and some of them are dark. And for some reason, because we were on a UFO panel, we were talking about UFOs, and I made this statement, look, I may have seen some, and you probably have too, and this much I know. They're as present as they want to be.
Yeah.
If they wanted to be more present, there would be nothing we could do about it.
Yeah.
But for some reason, they're not. Why? Because there have to be rules. There must be rules present that says these higher intelligent, more advanced races can't just come out and just take us over. Because we are eternal beings having a mortal existence.
Yes.
We can go anywhere, anytime, and they cannot. So when you say control, when you say take over everything, it's a very careful line. What they really have to do is make us or convince us to choose their way.
Okay.
And they do this a variety of ways. First, they drive us into despair, because when we're in despair, we're not too benevolent to one another.
And you lose your motivation
There's
to
a
do
lot of
anything.
those.
You're just in despair.
And the other is that they create dogma. Like we recall a lot of confusion in Jesus' day, right? The church controlled everything, and Rome, all of that was going on at the time. Jesus comes to Jerusalem in his 30th year, and he begins to interact and choose people that he needs to follow him and help him with his mission. But did he choose church members? No. In fact, he didn't like the church. In fact, he called them names all the time and called them out. So he wasn't really here to establish a church. And there were a lot of rules, a lot of commandments that have been handed down since the days of Egypt. Every Jewish person knew this, including the disciples that were following him. And they came to him one day, and they said, Master, it's pretty confusing out there, but we really want to know, because we think you're a really smart guy, and we're here, and it's a campfire, and it's just us. Which is the greatest commandment? And he said this sentence, which most people get wrong because it's written in Greek. And in Greek, you write things logically in reverse. You write the premise and then the conclusion. But if you read it the correct way, he says, this is the greatest commandment. Love yourself.
Yeah.
And then, when you can do that, love others as yourself.
Oh,
and
that's
when
good.
you're doing that, you'll be loving God with all your heart, might, and mind.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Now, if you do it in reverse, where it was written in the Greek, love God with all your heart, mind, then love
Yeah.
your neighbor as yourself. That's a complete reverse order.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Wow.
If you don't love yourself, you can't love your neighbor.
Oh my
And if
God.
you don't love yourself and your neighbor, you can't love God.
That's really
So,
good.
and then he said the greatest sentence of them all. Upon these hang all the laws and all the prophets.
Oh my gosh.
Simple. Jesus did not come here to teach us of his divinity. We already knew that. We could see that by the miracles he was doing. He came here to teach us of our divinity.
Oh my God.
Big difference.
Okay.
Big difference.
Now oh my God, I'm so excited. Thank you for sharing that. You just connected a personal dot for me. So in December of 2018, we'd had an ayahuasca ceremony we went to. And while I'm in the plant medicine, I got a very distinct message from the madre, if you will, the consciousness that I like to feel as this
Plant
feminine,
Yeah.
collective consciousness. She said, the problem that you're having, David, is you don't love yourself.
Yeah.
And she said, to love yourself is the highest form of worship. And I said, what? Never heard this before. She said, because you don't love yourself, you're not allowing that divinity within to be fully expressed. If you love yourself and you learn to enjoy yourself, that will be worshiping the divine, because you came here as an individual expression of the divine. And I'm like, what? So what you're doing is you're giving me some languaging also that helps to, I don't know if I'm looking for confirmation, I have a confirmation bias, but that certainty or whatever I'm looking for, but that experience that I have is now being bolstered by a scriptural thing, which kind of is important to me because I grew up Bible guy, that, whatever. I think that's the key for me, is that we are here to love being the character that we are. I'm here to enjoy being David, because that's the highest form of expression that I can have. You're here to enjoy being your character.
But with that flipped on its side, like you said, it taught us not to love ourselves. It
It's
taught
the
us
author
to.
of confusion.
It is.
It is the author of confusion, which is
Absolutely.
how the dark side, this
there it
dark
is.
syndicate, gains control
Yeah.
over mankind. That's why right now, the biggest religion in the world, we were discussing this earlier, is the none of the above.
None of the
Yeah.
above.
It's not
Yeah.
because they don't believe in God. It's because they've done everything religion has taught them to do, and then they went one more step.
Yeah. Yeah. You found the space where you're like, okay, did all the recipe and there's still empty. It's not meeting that need.
Yeah.
And then you go, oh, consciousness. That's what it is.
Well, when you go to church, you're with your friends, you're with people that love you, you're
Community.
bathed in love, you're bathed in music.
Yeah.
You have this resonation that takes place of reflectiveness that you're able to face another Monday through Saturday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And each Sunday is kind of rejuvenating like that.
Yeah.
And that's the way we punctuate our lives, or with paychecks, or with vacations, or 401k. Wait till I'm
Oh,
65, then I'll
right.
retire. But then I'm so old and sick and sore, I don't want to go do anything.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's why I teach people, break your life into moments
Moments.
and just
Yeah.
do moments one after the other. You'd be surprised how much you can accomplish.
Mm-hmm.
On how
Yeah.
much you'll love your life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you'll
Yeah.
have bad moments. That's okay.
Yeah.
Have a few good ones.
Yeah. One of the most interesting things that I'm learning is about hollow earth theory, or hollow earth ideas. I don't even know how to articulate it. And you're like, oh, I'm the hollow earth guy. So I would be remiss. There's people right now that would be screaming at this episode, you never asked him about hollow earth. Give some presence to your work and the things that you're learning and have learned.
Well, it wasn't a subject I started out pursuing. As we were writing the Arc of Millions of Years, as I told you, we studied these 44 ancient cultures. And they had this idea of the two planets being put together and having this life force and all of this. And somebody came to me with another book and said, here, read this book. I think it was called Our Hollow Earth or something like that. And I read it. And I was amused. And I put it on the shelf and didn't think about it again for a while. And then in early 2006, we took a photograph of Earth from space, from far out on another satellite. And we saw auroras over both poles at the same time. That was new to us. Normally, we thought the solar wind is what causes the auroras. It blows from the sun to the Earth, and when it strikes the atmosphere, it causes the ions to put off light, which is what we see as the northern lights or the southern lights. Mm-hmm. But not both poles at the same time. It got everyone excited, everyone. And JPL built this experiment called the Themis probe, which is basically a nose cone with 5 satellites in it. They launched it up into orbit. The 5 satellites took different orbits, different speeds, and occasionally they would line up like Jacob's ladder from Earth going out to the last number 5 satellite. And they would turn on and they would take measurements of the energy in orbit. And during one of these orbits, what they described as a cosmic bullet occurred. In between satellites 3 and 4, this energy came from another dimension into our space, exploded, past satellites 4 and 5 and went out to space, past satellites 3, 2, and 1, and struck the Earth. And when it did, there was the aurora. So they said, oh, well, that's it. The auroras are caused by cosmic bullets. And that was the report. Of course, a lot of us said, one event does not a report make.
Yeah.
We need to take more measurements. Right. And that's exactly what we started doing. Well, it interested me so much, I thought about this book, Our Hollow Earth. Wait a minute. That kind of fits in the balance over here, where, here we already know the way Earth is, right? We live on a molten ball floating through space, and we live on these tectonic plates like cornflakes in a bowl of milk, and we're happy about it. And the magma's moving around inside the planet, and that's what makes our magnetosphere, and that's what we put in our textbooks, and everyone was happy. Something started me looking. So I looked at the seismographical evidence. We have these listening stations around the planet. Every time there's an earthquake, it vibrates the planet from Malaysia or Japan or Alaska, wherever this vibration occurs. Those low frequency, high amplitude waves go through the planet and they end up at other listening stations. We kind of take a CAT scan of the Earth. Well, the USGS has only so much money and only so much personnel, so they just collected these for a long time. So Dr. Y. Sessions with Washington University employed his grad students. I say employed. Grad students don't really get paid.
No.
But he gives them 600,000 of these seismograms and says, input all this and let's see if we can create an image of the Earth. So they did. And what they published was really remarkable. They discovered another ocean the size of the Arctic Ocean underneath the Atlantic Ocean, inside the crust. Whoa. They could see the waves, the vibrations waves caused crashing on the shore inside the planet. And it was about 900 miles away. So here we have this crust, which we think is now 900 miles thick. Oh, but we got an ocean on the outside. We fly across and sail on. And there's an ocean on the inside. 2 different bodies of water. So my thought was, well, maybe these 2 bodies of water connect somewhere. Maybe not at the equator where it's 900 miles thick, but maybe at the poles where it gets kind of thin. The other thing we realized is, wait a minute, that's only 900 miles. What about the other, if you add both crusts, that's 1,800 miles. What about the other, 4,500 miles? What about that space? Well, Japan started taking measurements by listening to the sound, the frequency put off by the core. We know from our instruments that every single element, iron and nitrogen, oxygen, everything has its own frequency because the electrons arrange themselves in mathematical distances from a nucleus of a certain size. So that distance is like a guitar string. When you pluck it, it makes a frequency. We know that sound is chromium. We know that sound is iron. We know that sound is xenon. Wow. And what was coming out of the Earth was iron and xenon. which answered a lot of questions, because for a long time, since Dalton's law of partial pressures, we've wondered, where's all the xenon on Earth? Where's that gas? Where's that element? It's missing.
Oh.
We know that in any open air space, we call it headspace analysis, the ratio of elements in the liquid should be proportional in the headspace. But the xenon's missing. We know it's there, but we can't measure it in the atmosphere. It's locked up somewhere.
Oh, boy.
So the Japanese said, we think that the core of the Earth is a solid iron crystal. And the only way to get an iron crystal is to cross-link it with xenon. Lots of it. So that's where the missing xenon is. Well, any scientific paper gets peer-reviewed. So Carnegie Science picked it up. Harvard picked it up. Stanford University picked it up. And they developed experiments to disprove that hypothesis. And one of those experiments was called the diamond anvil experiment. They made an industrial diamond about this big around, cleaved it in two, and then they put a crucible in between it. You know, when you open the crucible, you can put some iron powder in it and infuse it with xenon gas, close the crucible, and then smash the two diamonds together with these big hydraulic rams. So you got these big 12-inch rams pushing in on a little 3/8-inch crucible. That's called an intensifier. We duplicated the pressure we think is on the inside of the Earth to make that iron crystal. Something missing was the temperature. So they shot a laser through the industrial diamond and heated that up to 1,000,000 degrees.
Jeez.
Same temperature as what we think the center of the Earth is. And lo and behold, the same signature showed up. So now we say, oh, so the core of the Earth is a solid iron crystal. Well, that's somewhere around 14.3 grams per cubic centimeter.
Mm.
We know how large the Earth is in diameter. We know how far away it is from the sun. And we know how long it takes us to go around the sun. So from those measurements, we know what the Earth should weigh. Pretty close, within a few metric million tons. We know what it should weigh. If that's the case, if the core is solid iron and the crust is 900 miles thick, there's some missing space. We have enough mass between those two, but the diameter of the Earth is too large, which means there's a gap between the core and the crust. And that means that Earth is actually hollow. So I thought, all right, let's go back to Newtonian mathematics. Let's look at what Newton said about hollow spheres. And I put this in my presentation. Newton says that on the inside of a sphere, all the gravity cancels out. Because if you're close to this side, you're far from that side. And so all the gravities mathematically cancel out. His thick shell physics is just an extrapolation of his thin shell physics. So theoretically, let's say we had an elevator in this room, and the elevator shaft went all the way to the center of the Earth. And I put you on a bathroom scale in the elevator, and we weighed you. And then we sent the elevator to the center of the Earth. What do you think your weight would do on the scale?
On the way down, wouldn't it be less? Or,
Yes.
Yeah.
Because we realize that we are accelerating, hopefully not falling, but we are accelerating at 32 feet per second to the Earth right now. This chair and the room and the ground is keeping us from doing that, but we are falling right now.
Mm-hmm.
So if we get to the center of the Earth, we're no longer falling. So gravity goes to zero. You won't weigh anything. You'll be weightless. If that's the case, it is impossible for planets to form as solid balls. They have to form as hollow spheres.
Whoa.
Some of them have cores, and some of them do not. But they have to form as hollow spheres. And then we look at our magnetosphere, which we have been doing since, I think it's 2009. We've been looking at the magnetosphere of the Earth. But we really seriously started measuring it in 2017. That's pretty recent.
Wow.
What we've realized is that magnetosphere is wobbling, and it's ebbing and flowing and things we didn't really expect before. My ancestor, Sir James Ross, discovered the North Magnetic Pole in 1831 off the coast of San Josef Islands. But since that time, it's moved. It's moved towards Siberia.
Yeah.
And right now, it's moving at the rate of about 20 or
Yeah.
30 miles a year.
Really?
That's across
Wow.
town. I mean,
Yeah.
it's moving. So that is the result of something we call the Coriolis effect. The Coriolis effect is a force that exists perpendicular to the axis of any rotating body, like a top or like a 10-speed. You ride a 10-speed, it doesn't fall over because there's a force that once that wheel starts turning, it's a gyroscopic force, a Coriolis effect, that keeps it upright. It will resist any movement that's perpendicular to that rotation.
Okay.
So if that's the case, we have a solid core, we have a solid crust, and the core is rotating at one speed, and the crust is rotating at another speed, it's going to create a magnetosphere because of the generative properties of electromagnetism. But it's also going to wobble because the two bodies won't stay completely aligned all the time. They'll begin to wobble like this.
Mm-hmm.
And when they do, sometimes the core will flip over because it's a smaller conservation of momentum body. And when that happens, the North Pole will become the South Pole. And we have lots of evidence of this on the Earth. We have igneous rock that is aligned with the poles, reversed from where they are now. We think that these rocks are about 100,000 years old. What we don't know is how long did it take for the flip to occur? Did it take 40,000 years? Did it take 7 years, 7 minutes? We don't know. What we do know, we can observe in our own solar system, is our own sun flips its poles every 11 years. So it does happen.
And is it a flip? Because I've heard that like the North Pole is moved off of where it's at. So is that part of it?
The magnetic pole is. The actual physical North Pole hasn't changed. The sun is still coming up in exactly the same spot that it did, 20,000 years ago. But the magnetic alignment of the Earth will change. And we think, what are the effects of that? We don't really know. We think that bees and birds and fish and all kinds of things navigate based on magnetic fields of the Earth. If their migration patterns change because the poles flip, I'm pretty sure life on Earth will change.
Yeah.
Wow. What implications are there for the hollow Earth? I mean, there's going to be people that are like, oh, there's a civilization there. Oh, there's Narnia comes to life, or Lord of the Rings is, the real. What spiritual implications are there for this structure of the sphere that we're on?
Well, there are things we know and things we don't know. The things that we do know is that there are other craft flying around this planet that aren't from around here. We don't know if they're from another star system or if they're just really old civilizations that used to live here and can no longer live on the surface. But there's hardly a town you can go to on Earth where they don't know about UFOs. So we know they're as present as they want to be, and they don't stay up in the sky all the time. They got to go somewhere. So the thing we don't know is, where do they go? They could be on the bottom of the sea, because we don't know much about the bottom of the ocean, or they could go inside the planet. We just don't know.
Wow. Oh.
Wow. So many things to think about.
And thus begins the journey down the rabbit hole.
Well, this is what science is. Science is questions.
Yeah.
When people tell me, oh, it's settled science, I go, that's like saying hot, cold. It's an oxymoron.
Yeah.
Science is never settled. Science is always asking questions.
Yeah.
Wow.
And just when you think you got the answer, you don't got the answer.
Yeah, it just means you haven't run enough experiments, which is why we want to take this expedition to the Arctic to see if we can find that opening. Because we have other evidence. We have sea-based evidence that has been anomalous as well. In 2008, when the NOAA did their trip to Malaysia to sample rays in the ocean, because rays in the ocean are kind of like frogs in the rainforest. Environmental stress or pollution or whatever, the frogs will mutate. They'll get like 6 legs or change colors, all kinds of stuff. So we sample them all the time. Same thing with rays in the ocean. So every 5 years they go to Malaysia and they capture rays and they document the changes. And normally they see 20 to 50 new species of rays.
Oh, wow.
But they're not really new species, they're just alterations of species we already have. But we document them. So in 2008, they went because of the time schedule. But in 2007, the Arctic ice had split open because of the planet was very warm that year, and the wind was blowing kind of strange, and it cleaved off a big piece of ice in the Arctic and opened the Northwest Passage for the first time in, I don't know, maybe 10,000 years. We don't know. Long time. That year, instead of 50 new species of rays, they found 1,500.
Jeez.
And they were not mutations. They were whole new species. Totally different color, totally different shape. They documented this as a remarkable anomaly. And it wasn't just rays. They found frilled sharks, which have been extinct for millions of years, dorsal squids, all kinds of things that we don't see except in fossil form, alive. So it led us to believe that maybe there's a sea vent up there that connects these two oceans, and that sea life escaped into our environment and we captured it. Well, since that time, it's all frozen over again, but we think we can break through that with an icebreaker, and we can get there and we can sample that sea vent and see if it's true.
You know, I just now wonder, going down a different timeline, because my PhD project was studying the stickiness of bubbles in the ocean.
Yeah.
Crystallinity changes.
Yeah. Now I wonder where that timeline would have brought me
Huh.
into all of these different areas.
Yeah, because we know oceans like the Atlantic and the Pacific, they meet in South America at the tip, but they don't blend. There's a line you could see where the two oceans run up against each other.
Oh, wow.
They don't just mix into one another. They sort of interface. And it's not just temperature, even though one's warmer than the other. It's also the salinity, the crystallinity, the actual matrix of water molecules is different between the oceans.
Wow.
Wow.
Whoa. Okay, so in the interest of having a conversation that feels complete, I know that you have a robust presence online. I know you talk for 3 hours every Sunday, and you have a lot of information to give. Give presence for our audience, how they can find you, how they can get a hold of you, how they can hear about you every week. Tell them how they can find you.
Okay, every Sunday night from 5 to 8 Pacific time, X Squared Radio. I call it X Squared Radio because it's a function, and any number you put into it will come out positive. So that's why I named it that way. We're live for 3 hours and free, so anyone can listen, can call in and ask questions or whatever, and they're all recorded. And it's been there for 15 years. Yeah. We do it live. I'm also on the air 2 hours on Monday, 2 hours on Wednesday from 7 to 9, which is basically political commentary. I take questions and do point counterpoint and current events, things that are happening around the world. I really like the economic science. I'm fascinated by personalities and how they conflict and how governments are trying to manage the existence of humanity on the earth. I think it can be fixed. I think we can learn to live as earthlings instead of tribes. And I think we have to, or we're not going to survive.
Yeah.
The easiest website to get everything I'm doing is just brooksagnew.com. So I have over 30 websites that I manage, different aspects of myself, but everything links there. Yeah. So if you like poetry or writing or philosophy or science, deep science, it's accessible right there.
Brilliant. I really appreciate having the opportunity to have you be a contribution to our journey and just to share your work. Thank you for what you're doing in the world and all of the things that are you. And as we kind of close up, what I want you to do is give presence to everything you've talked about and all the things you're doing. If there's one thing that you want our audience to take away, it's this. So what would that be for you?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on, and I'm glad I could connect a dot or two for you. In 25 words or less, everything that I've said is based upon the idea that we are source. We're connected, not just to one another, but everything. It was a funny thing. Adam was having a conversation with God when Eve was brought to him. I hate when they talk about somebody who's there. I'm sure she was going, "Hey, hello, I'm here." But God says, so this is your woman. What will you name her? He says, Eve. And God said, why? And he said, because she's the mother of all living. Well, you didn't really realize how profound that was until we started studying the human genome. In fact, all genomes. And we realized that we're not that much different than a cabbage, really, or a rubber tree plant. Not that their DNA is in us. Our DNA is in them. We are the co-creators of this world. And this is the greatest show in the universe. And you're alive. Here, right now, in the present. So take advantage of it.
Very
Awesome.
good.
It's been a pleasure. I'm so excited about your work, and thank you for being a part of our journey.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us here on Exploring the Human Journey. You can find us as a video on YouTube or listen to us as a podcast. You can also join in the conversation by following us on Facebook and Instagram. For more information, go to the website at exploringthehumanjourney.com.